Good evening, everyone. We continue with our study on the book of Numbers. We have arrived in Numbers chapter 15. As we carry on this particular chapter, you find that it will be good for us to bear in mind a parallel passage which will be found in Leviticus chapters 1 to 7. And I'll remind you again as we go along. Now, in Numbers chapter 15, it begins this way. And the Lord, and again, remember, this is Jehovah, he spoke to Moses saying, speak. In this case, speak to the children of Israel and say to them. Now, all of these statements are actually made by God. And so it is important for us to realize that this is not Moses speaking, but it's God speaking to Moses, and Moses is to relay this to the children of Israel. When you have come into the land you are about to inhabit. The word inhabit here is to sit. In fact, if you remember in Malay, the word is duduk, is to sit. It's a very similar word to the Hebrew, to inhabit, to live in that place, which I am giving to you. Now, who is the I? And that will be God, right? God is going to give the land to Israel to inhabit, to live in, right? To live in. So understand this. Yes, it is apportioned out, it's given to them, it's passed down from generation to generation. But the idea of giving, now some people think that this giving is like God giving a title deed to the children of Israel. It's none of those concepts. Basically, the land belongs to God, and God is giving to them to use, to live in it, so that the generations to come will have the ability to enjoy the land as long as they are obedient to God. It is on God's terms. So we have the phrase, God's land, God's rules. And so God said, when you get into the land, and when you say come into the land, it means this, they will definitely go in. They will definitely go in this time. And so when you are in there, make an offering by fire to the Lord, a burnt offering or a sacrifice. Now, let me just break this down. There are a couple of words here that we need to be aware. An offering by fire is ishet. Ishet means it's really a fire offering. So you can say this is a fire offering. And then a burnt offering. A burnt offering is olah. Olah means something that goes up. And this would be smoke as well as fragrance. A sacrifice in this case would be something slaughtered. Now understand that we have 1, 2, and 3. And all three may sound alike to us because we're not Israelites. So we're not quite into this business of offering. But these offerings are unique. The offerings are given for very specific purposes. It could be a fulfillment of a vow, which is called a peace offering. And this is shalem, meaning you have made a vow and we are completing the vow. And so shalem is about completion. And we make an offering to God to signify the completion. You can read it in Leviticus chapters 1 to 7. The next one is a free will offering. Free will offering means it's free will. The word free will here means voluntary. Now, many of us may not be aware that offering to God doesn't have to be part of an atonement ritual or a festival. It can be done as and when the individual is wanting, say, to make an offering to God, to thank God, a spontaneous gift. So you can think of it as a gift, that you bring a gift to God. Now, the pagans obviously will slaughter a baby, right? Or so to speak. But in the days of Israel, God only wanted a gift from the standpoint of an animal, never a life of a human. And so in gratitude, in thanksgiving, you can give an offering to God. It could also be because of requirements in appointed feasts. Now remember, the word appointed feasts here is this word, the appointments that God has made with them. Specific times of the year, they're supposed to do specific things, either to celebrate or to remember. So we've gone through the feasts and holy days as well. And the whole purpose is to make a sweet aroma to the Lord. And the sweet aroma, if you have done or read Leviticus chapters 1 to 7, this is really to make a scent, a fragrance, right? A fragrance, a sweet fragrance. Now, the idea of a sweet fragrance is, well, how should you say? It is a soothing fragrance. No, not just sweet smelling, but it is something that will appease God. And you'll find that this fragrance is actually dictated by God as how he wants it. It may come in one of two forms, right? One in the form of the offering of what we call the sacrifice of sweet smelling ashes. And that's done in the sanctuary itself. But the second one that is commonly referred to as a sweet aroma or a soothing fragrance is really what God said in Leviticus chapters 1 through 7. And he has made that statement a few times. It says that that fat belongs to the Lord. And they are not to eat the fat, they are to burn the fat. And so when you find that there is an offering by fire, it refers to an offering that is lit up. When there is a burnt offering, it is with the nuance that the smoke is going up and so is the fragrance. When you talk about a sacrifice, in most cases, you find that there is a killing of an animal. Otherwise, it's called an offering, whether it's a meal offering or a drink offering. But a sacrifice always involves a killing of an animal. And so all of these are nuances. Now, it helps us to appreciate this so that when we read through this chapter, we can tell the difference one from another. Now, let me put it here. Leviticus chapters 1 through 7. And these are the chapters on the offerings to be given to God. This is a repeat in a more narrative form, and they are to bring from the herd. The herd, in this case, would mean the oxen, right? Bakor would be the oxen. Or the flock. In this case, the flock is more of the, what we call the zone, usually sheep, right? Usually sheep. And the difference between the herd and the flock would be the size, the big four-legged and the small four-legged. And he who presents his offering to the Lord shall bring a grain offering of 1/10 of fine flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of oil. So it's oil and fine flour. This is called an offering. Now understand that when we say it's an offering, it's a korban. So let me just put this down. This is a korban. Korban in this case is something that you bring to God as you draw near to God. And this would be done in the tabernacle. And the second one in verse 5, 1/4 of a hin of wine as a drink offering. And you shall prepare with the burnt offering all the sacrifice for each lamb. This, you have to go back and read Leviticus 1-7, where it is with an ox, what do you do? When it's a lamb, what do you do? If it's a ram, what do you do? How do you prepare the grain offering of 2/10 of fine flour mixed with 1/3 of a hin of oil, or as a drink offering, which is wine, you offer 1/3 of a hin of wine as sweet aroma to the Lord. When you prepare a young bull as a burnt offering or a sacrifice to fulfill a vow, or as a peace offering to the Lord, now you have to be careful that they shall be offered with the young bull a grain offering of 3/10 of fine flour mixed with half a hin of oil. Now, all of these are just measurements for each type of offering. I'm not going to go through in detail because it doesn't benefit us to know too much about it, but just know in Leviticus chapter 1-7, you find a lot more detail. And you shall bring as a drink offering half a hin of wine, as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. Now, I guess you should remember, when it's by fire, it is nothing to do with wine, right? It's nothing to do with wine. It's more of the flour with oil, right? That is for the fire. The wine is never burnt. Verse 11, a continuation of the kinds of offerings that they must do. They must be done for each young bull, each ram. Now understand this, the bull would be a male, right? This is verse 11. A bull would be a bullock, a young bull, male. And each ram, there's also a male. This is a male sheep, right? A male sheep. For each lamb or young goat, young lamb and young goat would also tell us that this would be the lamb would be a male, and the young goat is also a male. And this is young, less than a year, right? And these are four-legged. So whenever we talk about an offering of a lamb, we must look at the text. It is not usually a lamb. It can be a lamb or a goat, but both must be male. And this was what happened in Exodus chapter 12 before they left Egypt, right, in the Passover. Now, according to the number you prepare, so you shall prepare to do with everyone to their number, which means everyone is accounted for in the offerings. Now, observe in verse 13 the difference of two types of people that God understands and looks for. There will be native born. They will do all these. Present an offering by fire, sweet aroma to the Lord. Now, in verse 14, it would be a stranger that dwells with you, or whoever is among you through your generations and will present an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. Just as you do, so shall he do. And this is important for us to catch. The native born means the Israelite. Means born to the nation, a native of the nation. The second one is called a stranger in verse 14. The stranger here is actually the ger. Now, some people would translate this as a proselyte, meaning someone who joined the nation and wants to be part of the nation, but they can't be a Jew, right? And so they do practice some of the offerings as given to God. The other one is whoever is among you throughout your generations. There are also people who may not be a ger. And these are, well, I don't know how you call that. These are guests, right? Non-Israelite. And they will want to present an offering made by fire. Now, all of these offering made by fire is a fire offering, and it is to appease God, to allow God to be happy, and He smells it and He is happy with the people. And so there are one type of people, the native, two, the ger, and three, the guests. I will call them the guests. Now, understand this, that all of them do give offerings to God, but the stranger and the guests do not participate in the religious offerings, right? They don't participate in the religious offerings, but they do participate in the voluntary offering. Now, verse 15 is clear and important. This is to show us how fair God is. One ordinance for you of the assembly, and for the stranger who dwells with you. Again, the word stranger here would be the ger. The ger is somebody who joins them, but they can't be a Jew. They can't be a Reuben. They can't be a Dan. They are not a tribe of Israel, but they really want to be part of them. So how do you become one of Israel? They are called a ger, a stranger, a proselyte, one who is very much like Israelite, but not really an Israelite, because they do not have a tribe. And because of that, there are certain things that they can't participate, but they are part and parcel of very much all the ordinances. And this is important. One ordinance or one regulation for everyone, right? For everyone. An ordinance forever throughout your generations. As you are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. One law, one custom. That means that this is an A and a B. The focus is one. This is the same one for you and the ger who dwells with you. Now, for all intents and purposes, the ger is like an Israelite, but no tribe. If no tribe, no inheritance. So we need to understand this very much. They participate in the peace with God. They participate in the blessings that God gives to the nation. They are recognized in the atonement for the nation. They are also recognized for whatever they do. For all intents and purposes, they are like Israel. The only thing they don't have is a tribe. And with tribe, they cannot participate in tribal related activities like inheritance, like a priesthood, like Levirate, the Levites. They can't be one of those. But apart from that, they are, with all intents and purposes, like everybody else that lives in the nation, protected by God. And the Israelites are obliged to defend the ger. Verse 17. Again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land. Again, when he says this, it is really, they will enter. And it's to remind them when God is bringing you in and you want to go in, at that point in time, this is what you need to do. You will eat of the bread of the land, that you shall offer up a heave offering to the Lord. Offer up a cake of the first of your ground meal. When they knead the dough, they will offer it as a heave offering of the threshing floor when they do a harvest. So you shall offer it up. On the first of your ground meal, you shall give to the Lord a heave offering throughout your generations. This is the first fruit practice of the harvest. Now, why is this important? This is the challenge that they will have. They will eat bread of the land, which means that they will have it as they eat of the land or they grow from it. Either way, when they first went in, they couldn't grow. They just ate from the land, and then later they grew. Now, when you eat of the land means what? This is something that we have to pay attention. No more manna when they enter the land. And then they shall realize that when in the land, they can enjoy the fruits of the land, a land that flowed with milk and honey. And as they enjoy the food that comes out of the ground, they are to remember God and offer to God a thanksgiving. Now, in many cultures, they do that. I think in East Malaysia, they have a harvest festival, Gawai. In many places in China, in any land, they thank heaven or they thank the gods for a bountiful harvest. And this is no different, except that there are specific rules and rituals that God imposed on the nation of Israel beyond what normal people would do as Thanksgiving. They are to take that and bake something and then offer it as part of a meal offering and also as one of the loaves to God. Now, in that sense, they are acknowledging the fact that they entered the land as God had promised. Number two, they had gained from the land as they worked on the land, that God has blessed the harvest. And number three, to always remember that this is to be done throughout the generations so that they will never forget it is God who brought them in and God who blessed them and God who gave them the produce. That is why it says that it is a heave offering throughout your generations. Do not forget, so that every generation does not forget God. Now, from verse 22 onwards, you find that there is a very peculiar word that we will have to break down. And this word is, you sin unintentionally. Now, a lot of people struggle with this terminology. And so let me just break this down. This is one word in the Hebrew. It's not two words. It's one word in the Hebrew, and it is shagar. And the idea of a shagar is to stray away, make error, right? You meander. This is the kind of concept, meaning if you have a straight path and you happen to went out a little bit, right? Meander. This is meandering. And you actually are not, it's not intentional. you didn't do it purposely. Now, a lot of people tend to think, well, when you sin, you have to sin purposely. Now, this is not that kind of a concept. It says here in the concept of a shagar, it means that God has given commandments. And when you step out of line, it means you did not keep these commandments. All right? And it is not done on an intention like you want to spite God and you knew that you are to do it, but you purposely didn't do it. That would be sinning intentionally. So unintentionally, sometimes when you walk out of line. Sometimes when we are driving, we may drive out of the line. No, not that you purposely did it, but for some reason you were unaware that you had gone out of line and then you did. And so all that the Lord had commanded you by the hand of Moses from the day the Lord gave commandment and onward throughout your generations, then it will be. If it is unintentionally committed without the knowledge of the congregation, meaning somebody did it and nobody else knew, then the whole congregation shall offer one bull as a burnt offering, as a sweet aroma to the Lord. Now, all this is a reference to the Day of Atonement. Right? Because it is about the whole congregation. That the whole congregation offers this. With its grain offering, drink offering according to the ordinance. One kid of the goats as a sin offering. And so the priest shall make atonement. This is covering. For the whole congregation of the children of Israel, and it shall be forgiven them. For it was unintentional. Need to break this down. God forgives this because it is unintentional. Right? It is an atonement, and you need to do the ritual as a sin offering with a kid of the goats. It is about goats. So in the Day of Atonement, there are two goats. One goat is to be killed and offered as a sin offering. This is for the whole congregation. And so they shall bring their offering, an offering made by fire, the sin offering be looked for the Lord for their unintended sin. Now, all of these English may be different, but they all refer to the idea that the sin itself is unintended. And this is khatat. You missed what God had said. Okay? And this is important. And God will forgive them. The whole congregation of the children of Israel and the stranger, remember? The stranger and the children of Israel are now treated one and together, who dwells among them, because the people did it unintentionally. Verse 26. Unintentionally, shagar, meaning not on purpose. Unknowingly. Right? Unknowingly. In error. And so the solution that God gave is this ritual. You offer a burnt offering, a young bull as a burnt offering, a grain offering, a drink offering, and a sin offering of one goat. And so this is about the atonement. Verse 25 says the atonement is that God will forgive them. This is a covering. And the forgiveness here is to pardon them. Is God looking at the animal? Actually, no. God has no interest in the animal, in the forgiveness. In forgiving the congregation, God is looking at their obedience to the ritual. Remember, God's land, God's rules. If you commit this kind of a sin, you must follow the rules to be pardoned. And all of this has to do with unintentional sin. and mostly had to do with the tabernacle, with the course of living life that made them unclean, and unknowingly they made offering to God in a state of uncleanness without knowing. So it's unintentional. This is what it means by unintentional sin, so that there is an atonement for them in verse 22. Now, moving forward in verse 27, continues this theme. If a person sins unintentionally, then he shall bring a female goat of its first year, meaning within 12 months, as a sin offering. The priest shall do the ritual to make atonement for the person who sins unintentionally. Because when he sins unintentionally before the Lord, to make atonement, and it will be forgiven him when the ritual is done. Now notice in this case, it is a female goat. So go back and read Leviticus chapters 1 to 7. Sometimes it's male, occasionally it's a female. And you shall have one law for him who sins unintentionally: native and stranger. Why does God do this? God is just and fair. God doesn't say, oh, just because you are a native Israelite, I will treat you like this. If you're not a native of Israel, but you still join the nation, I'll treat you differently. In the eyes of God, the Ger and Israelite is treated as the same. So if you sin unintentionally, do this. Now comes verse 30, a short verse. And 30 and 31 is about the opposite of sin unintentionally. It says a person who does anything presumptuously. Now verse 30 tells us the word presumptuously, as it said, means that he did by I guess in the English, by high-handedness. By high-handedness. And the idea here is that one lifting up hand. Now let me explain the imagery. When you lift up your hand, you are knowingly doing something. When it is unknowing, it's been done and you didn't realize it was done. But in this case, the word here in presumptuous is to be high-handed. You lifted up your hand and you did it. And that is what in Hebrew calls intentional sin, intentional wrongdoing, whether native or stranger, same. If they bring a reproach on the Lord. Now this word reproach is also translated as blaspheme, or it is translated as, how should we understand this? When you taunt God, right? That, oh, see, God, you say I can't do this, I'll do it in your sight. That is intentional. He does reviling to God. And so it's called a blaspheming God action. Now notice this, if somebody does that, whether native or stranger, look at what God says. He doesn't say, go to the priest, bring a female goat or a female sheep or whatever. He says, he shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord, broken his commandment. Now understand this, despise the word of the Lord is A, broken his commandment is a B. It's the same thing. What do you mean by despise the word of the Lord? The word despise means you treat as worthless. You couldn't be bothered what God has said. And so in this case, it says you have broken his commandment. The broken here is the word para. Para means to step on it, to break. The word broken is a very interesting word. When you have a harvest, right, you've got the ox, and the ox actually steps on the grain. Steps on the grain, and what it does is that the grain itself is broken up from the husk, right? From the husk. So this grain is broken up, and this is the concept of breaking, right? It's broken. The husk is broken. And so that you can take the grain. And this is done by the bull, the par. The bull is called a par. And the word para means the bull is like the bull stepping on the grain, breaking the husk. And so this idea of breaking the commandment of God is despising the word of God, is treating the word of God as worthless, no value. When you step on the word of God, you are treating it as dirt. See, that's an A and a B. And so God says this person will be karat. The word karat has a broad meaning. He will be diminished, he'll be taken away, he will be cut off, he will be executed, he will die alone. Right? That is what it means. And so the phrase here says, he shall be completely cut off, his guilt shall be upon him. Now notice, all of this is very important for us to be very clear, right? His avon shall be upon him, and he will be completely cut off. Completely cut off means surely cut off. Like surely die. You know, the day you eat of it, you will surely die. And so this word here is the same form of construct that you will be surely cut off. And he will die. He will have to die. He will be taken away. He will have no part of the people of God. Now, this phrase here, his guilt shall be upon him, is the rule. What is the rule? This is the rule in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 18. I think you would find that in verse 4, Ezekiel chapter 18 and in verse 4, it says this: the soul who sins shall die. All right? And this is the principle that God is teaching here. If this is the person who has intentionally, presumptuously did it by his hand, that he's very clear about it, and he went to blaspheme Jehovah God, he shall be karat from his people, because he has A, treated the word of God as worthless, B, like the ox, stepped on the commandments of God, breaking it, also treating it as worthless. And so this person shall die. This is the point, that no one can take the guilt of this person. It is a common justice system that the one who commits the sin has to be the one to pay the price. In any court of law around the world, including the one that God has given to Israel, the one who has done this violent sin in the eyes of God, there is no atonement. As you can see in verse 30, God didn't say, oh, now you can go to the Kohanim, the priest, and bring an ox. In this case, prepare to die, because you have blasphemed God, and it's treated as a serious crime, not unintentional. This is very intentional. And so the Bible is clear, and this shows what? This shows that God is a fair and just God. Not only the Ger and the native shares the same rule, that anyone who sins this way intentionally or presumptuously, they will have to die, whether native or Ger. And everyone in this particular case has no atonement. In verse 32 now goes on to tell us this. While the children of Israel were in the wilderness, something happened. Now, 32 is another occasion, right? After that was said, after the warnings were given, after the instructions were given, they were traveling again in the wilderness. They found someone gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. Now remember, you shall not work on the Sabbath day, remember? And if you work on the Sabbath day, it will be death. And that will be found in Exodus chapters 23 as well. 21 and 22. And so they found him gathering sticks brought to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation in front of the leaders, and they put him under guard. So verse 34 means put him under guard to watch him so that he doesn't run away. Because it has not been explained what should be done in this case. Very interesting. Explain means clearly declared. This was not a specific that they knew what to do. And so Moses went to speak to God, and the Lord said to Moses, well, this man must be surely put to death. Right? And all the congregation shall stone him, notice, outside the camp. You cannot kill anyone inside the camp. And so off it goes, as the Lord commanded Moses. All the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. Notice a few things. If there is something unsure, make sure. Why? Because there can be grievous consequences you cannot reverse. So you cannot execute just because you felt like it. And so this is justice. Right? This is justice. It is very important for us to understand justice. That if in doubt, you cannot execute a life, because the life of an individual is made in the image of God. And it has to be clearly decided. And so the Jews all through the years, when they convene their councils, have hardly stoned anyone. So whenever we read in the Bible that they stoned him with stones and he died, it is one of those rare occasions. That's point number one I wanted to make. Point number two is that not everything is stated in black and white in the Bible. And so what we read in the Hebrew text of the Bible is the main headings. When it comes to the details, that's when the Jews themselves and the Israelites, the leaders, will sit down and decide what would be the proper interpretation and how do we execute some of these rules given by God. And these are rules that, well, at least according to the Israelites, that God has spoken to Moses separately, and they were not recorded in the Bible. And they call that the oral law. This one here that we read is called the written law. And hence, this passage, I suppose, in a way, expresses that not every little detail is shown in the Bible, and much of it is actually discussed or told to Moses on the side, that there will be many, many little details that needs to be tackled over the course of living, so that the law of God can be upheld. And so 32 to 35 basically tells us that there is that aspect of a oral law, or you call it an oral tradition, that God gave to Moses apart from the written law. Now, who would appreciate all these? Not us. The people who would appreciate this and will care whether there's an oral law or not would be the Jews themselves, because they have to comply to it. And if you have to comply, you have to make sure that what you're doing is right before God. Our last section is a very interesting and seldom discussed passage. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the children of Israel. Tell them." Now, this one, say to them, really is to the men, right? This is the Hebrew. This is not for the women, right? Not for the women. And then it says here, make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. Now, this word tassels that we translate as tassels, or fringe, it's at the edge of your garment, right? At the edge of the garment, you would find that you have this tassels, right? And there will be 4 tassels. And this is called, in Hebrew, the tzitzit. The tzitzit, or tassels at the corner of their garments throughout their generation. And that is why you find that in religious Jews today, in the garments they wear, they have tzitzit at the corners of the garments, right? So throughout the generations, they actually wear it this way. And so by the shape of the garment, by the style of the garment, they are also different. And that you should have the tzitzit, that you may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, that you may not follow the harlotry which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined. Now, harlotry is important to remember. This is in verse 39. The idea of harlotry is, what do you call it? Prostitution. And that means idolatry. And so the tzitzit at the corners are called wings, right? The corners, the tzitzit, when they look at it, it's a remembrance. God has given them all kinds of physical guide to point them to remember. When you look at the tzitzit, remember the commandments of the God, that you do not worship other gods, right? Do not make your mind to worship other gods, and your own eyes are inclined. That incline means follow after. In the Hebrew context, every person has free will, and every person made by God has inclinations, and they like things. They want to go after things. And in this particular case, when they look at harlotry, they look at other idols, they are to decide own heart, and this is decision. They have to decide not to follow their heart's inclination, because that would be idolatry. And idolatry is seen in very angry light by God. And so the sit for all the Israelites is to remind them that they are not to commit idolatry. Very interesting way of reminding them. And that you may remember and do all the commands and be holy for your God. Remember, the word holy is different. Different because now they are wearing clothes with sit hanging on the side, 4 of them, and they are to be duly reminded when they see that they do not commit idolatry. And so by wearing differently, they are holy to God. Now, verse 41 is very important. It's been repeated many times, like in Exodus chapter 20, 21, 22, 23. It says, Ani Yehovah Elohim. I am Jehovah, your God, your Elohim, the one that you know, who brought you out of the land of Egypt by his strong arm to be your God. Ani Yehovah Elohim. This is repeated twice, if you notice. This is one time. This is another time. When you have the word I, it is emphasis. When you have it repeated 2 times, it is a very strong emphasis. So that these men, when they lead their family, when they lead the nation, when they lead their tribes, they are always made to remember that they are to follow God, and not, when they are tempted by other idols, they are not to follow other idols. And that is how God has now imposed on the clothing style of the Hebrew people or the Israelites to remind them of the law of God. If you remember, in the early part of the book of Deuteronomy, they are to nail it to the wall of the doorpost, write it as frontlets of the eye. It's all very visual, and in this case, clothing, right? Clothing to remind them of the word of God. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 15.